You know, epiphanies are interesting because they just pop out of nowhere. I guess that's what the word means. Um, but I had done a post recently about influence and the way that I grew up and all of that stuff. And then I was thinking back about that, and something occurred to me that I had never thought of before. And I spoke a lot about my father and how he had really high standards and challenged me. And I actually put a TikTok video out that was talking about the girl boss syndrome and how women were often raised by fathers that had misogynistic views, and they saw the mom as needing to be submissive, but they saw their daughter, who was a reflection of them, as needing to be very independent and outspoken and strong and ambitious. And so they really poured themselves into their daughter, almost like they would pour themselves into a son. And I really resonated with this TikTok video. That's why I shared it to my Facebook page. And because it just struck a chord with me that was so strong. But then it made me think about things I had never, ever thought about before. And that was that one thing that it didn't mention, that video didn't mention, is the critical nature of a father. My father, I already said, had very high standards, and those standards sometimes showed up in what I did not being good enough. And him telling me, and I've made this statement before, and it was even on Olivia Pope on Scandal: you're a black woman, you have to be twice as good to be considered half as good. And I remembered my father saying that to me, and he would be very critical of things that I did and expect me to work harder, try harder, do more, no excuses kind of behavior. And I remembered even the idea of the difference between an excuse and a reason was basically, excuses if it's too hard and you want to give up. It's basically trying to get a pass for your failure. A reason is something that's kind of out of your control. So for example, if you were supposed to get to an interview and there was a flood and no one could pass through that water to get there, that's not an excuse. That's a reason, because your failure is not something that you're trying to hide or get, waved away. It's something that's out of your control. But if you just were running late because you didn't manage your time well, then coming up with something that didn't happen, a lie, would be an excuse. Okay. And a lot of times people do lie or they exaggerate to make excuses. But anyway, I digress for a second. But what I was realizing is that I post a lot on social media, and there are people who come out and they call me a man basher, or say that I'm a man hater, or that I'm misandrous, or misogynistic, which they really mean misandrous, but they call me both. And what just occurred to me is I am not a man by any, I'm not at all, but I have a lot of my father in me. I have that idea of high standards, no excuses, excellence, those kind of things are really engraven in me. And so I apply that standard to men and women, and even children at a certain age. And I really believe that there's a possibility that some of the men that come into my post with these statements, or even some of the women, have never experienced that type of environment. If you grew up with a mother or with an environment that was always affirming and always praising and encouraging and never was critical. If you grew up without a father, possibly, and never had that kind of tough love kind of conversation where the idea was, I'm going to toughen you up before the world gets to you. You're going to be prepared for the harshness of the world. You're going to be prepared for those hard talks and those high standards, because you're going to have experienced them at home first. It's going to be natural to you. It's going to be no sweat to you. It is really making me wonder whether the people that have such a problem with some of the things that I say have never experienced tough love, have never experienced a father's type of criticism, where it is very straightforward, no punches pulled, no holds barred, tell it like it is, this is it, toe the line, these are my standards, you will meet them, kind of rhetoric. And I'm not saying that I speak to people that way because I'm not a father and I'm not their father, but I do speak sometimes in a very straightforward, no frills way. And that in itself might be very different for people who haven't grown up around that, and everything was politically correct, or everything was geared to soften or mollycoddle them. And it's really beginning to make me think that that may be the disconnect. Not that I'm going to change, because I believe that there's a need, a huge need, for people to tell the truth, for people to be straight shooters, for people to cut to the chase and tell it like it is. I think there's a huge need for that. I think there's way too much of the mollycoddling and the cutting corners and the trying to make everybody feel good about everything. And there's no standards, there's no hard lines, there's no accountability, which is a buzzword, of course, as we know, that a lot of people like to throw around, but no accountability. So I don't plan on changing, but it's just, it's interesting. And I think that people, might reflect on that. If you found my content to be problematic, but you still follow me, so, I just thought that was really interesting. And as we're, coming up on Mother's Day, a mother's love and a father's love to me are very, very different. And we do have some very tough moms out there, but I think that they're very, very different in the way that